I don't know if you guys saw the recent Dune movie, okay? And I remember watching the Fremen as the Fremen are portrayed in the movie, and it's very multiracial, right? So they have like black Fremen, they have white Fremen, they have Middle Eastern Fremen, they have all sorts of Fremen, okay? And I was just distracted by this hugely. I was put off by it because I know, as the kids say, I know the lore of the Fremen, right? That they are this religious group that had been migratory and landed on Dune hundreds, maybe thousands of years earlier, and they live in these little sieges, they're called, these very tight communities, and they're oppressed by the imperial forces that rule Dune to extract the spice. And so they're living cheek over jowl, in these high persecuted communities. And I'm just wondering to myself how for centuries and centuries they would maintain the endogamous relationships that they would need to have still after all those centuries. Black Fremen, white Fremen, Middle Eastern looking Fremen. Like, how would they not have integrated enough by that time to just have one race of Fremen? I'm just thinking of what sort of endogamous rules they must have, policing who the kids are dating, and do they exile into the sand, kids that are born of mixed Fremen race or whatever, and this is highly, obviously to the cohesion of the Fremen, who rely on being super high cohesion, right? That the ability for the Fremen to work together, to sacrifice for each other, for the Fremen cause, is the only way they're surviving this brutal oppression by the Harkonnens, right? And surely this would cause these huge divisions among the Fremen that would impair their ability to survive. And I'm just like, this couldn't have happened. It's almost like, why don't you just have Fremen who are all disabled or something like that? I mean, it's just so obviously disabling to their ability to survive. The Fremen, of course, being modeled after kind of Bedouin, who were famous for their high social cohesion, or asabaya, which I'm going to talk about in a second. So when I talk about social cohesion, I'm going to mean something like group solidarity, shared purpose, and willingness to provide mutual support. Very critical, that last part, especially when attacked. It's a poorly theorized concept in social science, although sociology is very interested in cohesion. There are many, many analyses of cohesion, and this is a problem when people try to find out, well, what are the determinants of cohesion? How do you increase cohesion, et cetera? Because everyone has a different idea of what social cohesion should be. But whatever it is, especially if you're focusing on it as I am, it's very important to the survival of groups, tribes, polities, nations in a competitive world, as in the Fremen's case. I think even the cosmopolitans among us recognize that, look, you need stable societies to do your work and to live. So I think all of us, nationalists and cosmopolitans alike, need to be concerned about nurturing social cohesion. So in this talk, I'm going to argue that endogamous or within group mating patterns among a nation's subgroups will weaken social cohesion, and that this is reasonable. And because of this, receiving nations should consider predictable endogamy a consideration that weighs against admittance of prospective migrant populations. I'm going to ignore all sorts of important moral questions, like claims of natural justice, which we all are worried about, claims of individual rights and personal freedoms, that is important, especially to the liberals among us, minority outgroup protections, that is concern to the leftists among us, concerns about human capital. If you're sort of a cosmopolitan rightist, you're like, oh, don't let in, populations with lower human capital, but let in populations with higher human capital. I doubt there are any ethno-nationalists among us, but I'm totally unconcerned about ethno-nationalist concerns or racial purity. And I'm unconcerned if there are any nativists among us, any sort of duties to natives or something like that. Some of these things I'm concerned about too, I'm just ignoring them. What I do care about is the importance of social cohesion for nations in a competitive world. Individuals need to be part of groups who have your back. You're going to get eaten up in a world unless you're part of a group, okay? You don't need to find nations intrinsically valuable to appreciate this. Okay, so I'm very unromantic about nationalism in this talk. You just need to be part of a group to survive. So even if you're highly individualist, you need to be part of a group to survive. And so let's just call this pragmatic nationalism, right? Just nationalism as instrumental for individual survival. There's a nearby concept that a lot of people let bleed into their thoughts about social cohesion, and that is social trust. So, I'm going to understand social trust is basically the expectation that, generally speaking, others will follow cooperative norms. And philosophers tend to value this. And there are some philosophers talking about it. I think we need to talk about it more. But social cohesion is less talked about by philosophers. And the way I'm thinking about social cohesion is especially noted by the Arabic term asabaya, which comes from Ibn Khaldun, when in his discussions of high social cohesion among the Bedouin, who, of course, the Fremen are modeled after. And that is presence of group solidarity, shared purpose, and willingness to provide mutual support, as I said. It is worth keeping in mind, sort of as a thought experiment, but this actually occurs in real life, that you can have a high trust community with low social cohesion. So just think about Amish people. All of us probably here have bought stuff from Amish people. We all have warm feelings towards Amish people. They're good citizens in so many ways. None of us probably are friends with an Amish person. And none of us ever think about dating an Amish person or think that our kids might ever marry an Amish person. In my town in West Central Minnesota, there is a large contingent of apostolic Christians who are kind of a breakoff of Mennonites and so forth. And unlike Amish people, they're not out in the countryside. They're highly integrated in the town and so forth. But they also practice endogamous mating among members, and super high social trust between. It's a high trust community generally. Okay, so it's a place where you can drop a wallet full of money and people will, return it to you. I have left hundreds of dollars in a baby bag at a park and was like wondering where my baby bag is at, and then went back 2 days later. My baby bag was still there on the park bench. Okay, super high. People don't lock their doors, stuff like that. And no one thinks an apostolic Christian is going to cheat you or rob you or anything like that. Super high trust. But there is not great social cohesion between the apostolic Christians and the non-apostolic Christians. All right, so this is something to bear in mind, that you can have high trust communities with low social cohesion. You can also, I don't talk about this in the paper, so apologies. I'm interested in this. It seems like you could have low trust communities with high social cohesion. So one of the big markers of social cohesion is, are you willing to fight for the country? And I can't help noticing that Pakistan is up there. And I haven't looked at Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia, but I'm guessing these are not super high trust places. But they have, this asabaya. If you attack them, many people will show up to fight. And it has been remarked by philosophers throughout history that there is worry about these endogamous groups forming parallel societies within your community. Aristotle says heterogeneity of stocks may lead to faction, at any rate until they have time to assimilate. A city cannot be constituted from any chance collection of people, he says, or in any chance period of time. Most of the cities which have admitted settlers, either at the time of their foundation or later, have been troubled by faction. Ibn Khaldun thinks this is a reason why it's important to have people of one ethnicity, that this is a big aid to social cohesion or asabaya. However, Khaldun is okay with people coming in, but they have to be integrated in the community by marriage and forget their past lineages. Okay, so and I don't, just a survey of history will tell you that genocides against Jewish, Morisco, Roma, Armenian, Yazidi, Bosnian Muslim, Rohingya, Christian Nigerian, Alawite, Kurd, and Christian Syrian populations. These are all examples of how these are all endogamous groups being genocided or pogromed out. And it undermines and, of course, marks, right? So it's usually, there's deeper divisions that is the reason why they're endogamous. factionalization. So if you're going to be an endogamous group inside of a society, it's good not to be too poor or too rich or too politically powerful or too many. And secessionist movements are often, probably usually by endogamous groups. And in the literature, in the empirical literature, endogamy is regularly treated as an important marker of social cohesion. More of it, it's inversely correlated. Cohesion. So, lesson so far: we need to live in groups that have that protect, our interests. Prudentially, at least, we should be concerned about national cohesion, which I call pragmatic nationalism. Cohesion is distinct from social trust, and endogamy might be consistent with social trust, but is detrimental to cohesion. Now, let's do some ethics, or armchair psychology, perhaps. Is it reasonable for cohesion to degrade in response to endogamy, I wonder? And I think so. I think telling someone, look, I'll deal with you, I'll work with you, maybe I'll even be your business partner, but I won't let your kids date my kids. How does it make you feel? I'm interested in if that makes you feel alienated to some degree to the person you're working with, maybe quite smoothly. It seems to me in our normal cooperative endeavors, what we have is an openness to the possibility of a more, and indeed the most intimate connection possible, combining our lineages. Maybe you and I will date and marry. Maybe your kids and my kids will date and marry, or something like this. That possibility is open. But when I'm dealing with someone who's endogamous, I know that's off the table. So endogamy, even if ideally trusting and cooperative, says that we will never have anything more than a transactional relationship with each other. I benefit you, you benefit me. But transactional relationships are, of course, substitutable in a way that fusing ones are not, right? Because if we have a good thing going, I buy your widgets and, we have a long-term relationship. Well, if someone else sells me the widgets that are just as good, cheaper, I'm going to switch to them. It's business, right? Or if you provide me security and I provide you some service, if I find someone that provides me more security at a lower price or with better weather or something like that, I will just switch out. They're substitutable in a way that fusing relationships, where it's like, okay, well, our kids are married, I'm stuck with you for life, are much more cohesive. And this is, of course, why traditionally, if you really wanted to secure peace with an old rival, you arrange to have, one of your princesses marry one of their princes. If we apply this to a nation, I think we'll see that ideally we'd have something like the intermarriage principle, which is that it's ideal for a nation and its various ethnicities not to be endogamous. Again, think, will your group have my back if it won't fuse with my group? And why should we fight for your group if your group won't marry our kids? These are interesting questions. Even more strongly, I think there's an intra-marriage condition, which is that ideally, it'd be nice if the people of a nation preferred to marry co-nationals over foreigners. Okay, so many rom-coms have an American woman dating a British guy, right? He's the heartthrob. Let's go to this. How many? Like this many. This many. Okay? And all of these are ones in which you have an American woman and just British. Heartthrob. Look at this. Okay? I find this interesting. I can't help but find this interesting. You may not notice it. The people going to the theater may not notice it. But do Black Americans notice it? That there's like orders of magnitude more white American women, rom-coms with white American women with a British heartthrob rather than a Black American or a Hispanic American or whatever heartthrob. I think they notice. I think that weighs against their feeling of being part of the nation. So I'll pause here, a little side thought about nationalism, that what I'm talking about here does not require ethno-nationalism, obviously. Pragmatic nationalism is compatible with ethno-nationalism, it is. But if diversity is sought, or if diversity is present, it does aim at ethnogenesis, making a new, like we saw at the Fremen, Like, why aren't you guys are all Fremen fighting the Harkonnen, why are you? Note that civic nationalists are neutral on ethnogenesis. So a lot of people think, oh, civic nationalism is the not racist option. No, nationalism is the racist option. But they forget, like, civic nationalism is completely compatible with a group of 5 nations, say, all saying we're going to be, or 5 races, say, all deciding to be, have endogamy within their groups. Maybe they put that in the Constitution. You know, no blues can mate with non-blues, no greens can mate with non-greens. They might have that in the Constitution. Love that. That's their civic nation. Okay. So civic nationalists are very compatible with very strong sort of ethnocentrism among endogamous groups. So if you think ethnic segregation is morally intolerable, I don't. But if you think ethnic segregation is morally intolerable in society, then be an ethno-nationalist maybe. Just say, hey, you know, if you're in, but we don't want you in, so we're going to keep you out. Or be an ethnogenetic, and that is the adjectival word for it, ethnogenetic pragmatic nationalist. Something to think about. Let's start applying this to immigration. If you are with me so far, then you're going to see why I would be for the Ruth principle. Ruth, of course, the Moabite woman who said to her mother-in-law, I think Naomi, right, your people shall be my people, your God shall be my God, and so forth, right? So immigrants should come prepared to intermarry with natives and prefer their new compatriots to foreigners, and natives should bar entry to immigrant populations who don't. I talk in the paper about how my grandmother, my family came to America about 110 years ago, and you know, they kind of wanted their kids to marry Greek. They imagined their kids marrying Greeks in America. And you know, I laugh because my wife, her grandmother, same way, you know, was very mad when her dad married her dad was Norwegian American, married was Lutheran Norwegian, married a Catholic Austrian American. Didn't like that. Would be horrified to think that her granddaughter would marry Greek American, I'm sure. You know, you gotta wonder, like, okay, so here's, you know, the Ellis Island people were supposed to think this is so wonderful, but you know, they're all coming here hoping that their kids are endogamous. Rejection principle. Would-be migrants who will predictably suffer sexual segregation, whether due to norms or individual preferences in their prospective destination country, should avoid migration. And native populations should admit them. In other words, if you don't want to intermarry with them, then or if you anticipate that the natives aren't going to want to intermarry with you, then this weighs against the migration happening, okay? And so we have this, we have some ethnicities coming who are dispreferred on the American mating market, and we could switch to some other country and different ethnicities will be dispreferred on the mating market, okay? But you know, just think of how alienating it is to think that, yeah, I could find a wife in the country of my origin or my parents' origin, but I'm having a hard time finding a wife or husband here because my ethnicity is dispreferred. That has to deeply erode your asabaya with your new nation. Exclusion principle. Native ethnicities unwilling to be exogamous among their co-nationals. So they're already here. So there's some, there's 2 ethnicities, and you find your ethnicity, you don't want to intermarry with that other ethnicity of your nation. Then this gives you a prima facie reason to secede or separate, okay? Or if you find your ethnicity is way more interested in marrying co-ethnics abroad than with your co-nationals of different ethnicities or religion or whatever, then this gives you, again, reason to leave. Maybe go back to a place where your children will marry in. So like the South African example, a white South African is more likely to marry a white non-South African than a black South African. Well, then this to me suggests reasons to either have a secession or emigrate. Non-discrimination. This preference by a migrant group for some significant native ethnicity or ethnicities or predictable dispreference by some significant native ethnicities for a migrant group weighs against admitting said migrants. Right, so I'm just supposing, like, suppose it's 1900, right, and you're looking over at thousands of Southern and Eastern Europeans coming into Ellis Island, and right next to you is a Black American. And the Black American knows you, a white person, say, don't want your kids to marry the Black American's kids, okay? He knows that. That's America, okay? But how is the Black American supposed to feel about tens of thousands of these new migrants coming in who also don't want to marry the Black Americans' kids? I mean, he's supposed to be happy about this? You know, I mean, I would not be happy about this if I were a Black American watching this event happen, right? So I put it to you, I guess we could talk about it in the Q&A, but suppose a population of would-be migrants, ex-Histanis, are hardworking, honest, and smart, you know, make them high trust, whatever. But they don't like Blacks. They wouldn't hurt Blacks. They may hire Blacks, but they wouldn't marry a Black American, and they teach their kids that it's unacceptable to do so. Should this count strongly against their right to migrate? And this is not science fiction, okay? This is not a would you rather, you know, whatever, you know, have a spoonful of cayenne pepper, or, you know, what? This is like real life. This is like most migrants to America, okay? Most migrants to America have these endogamous norms towards Black Americans, okay? So, concluding thoughts. It's not too controversial to say that endogamy marks or causes faction or lower social cohesion. And it's a empirical claim, but I think it's kind of widely accepted in the literature, and we'll talk about that more. It is more controversial to say why and whether or not it's reasonable. And I think it is reasonable to feel excluded in an important way by those who won't mate with you because of your identity or because they find your kind unattractive. So it's one thing if they just find you, like as an individual, unattractive or whatever. But if you're off the table just because of your religion or your race or your ethnicity or something, that's different. Or if like something that is pretty much universal or very common among people of your kind. But there's a paper within the paper here. There's a point within a point, right? And I'll just say it to you in your private ear that indirectly what I am trying to get at in this paper is to start a discussion about what natives should want from migrants and what migrants should want from natives. Is it enough to have high trust behavior, hard work, talent, etc. for migrants? A lot of people feel like this, like, you know, no, they make the country better because they're hardworking, or maybe it's a high trust population. Not many migrants are not, but you know, some are. I love their food. We need more doctors. Is that enough? Or do we want to only bring people in who we will also integrate with in this most deep and fundamental way of actually combining our lineage with? On the migrant side of things, is it enough to have safety and financial opportunity from natives? Is a migrant treating natives instrumentally by saying, oh, I want to go to America, it's safer. I want to go to Britain, it's safer. I could have a nice house if I go to Britain, or my kids could be more educated or something like that. All instrumental, right? If I don't want to marry an American, I would be mad if my kid married an American. I want my kids to marry a Pakistani. Then it's just like, well, are you just treating natives in this instrumental way? Are the migrants meeting their moral obligations to natives? I put this to you. If not, this implicates most migrants and most pro-migration natives. The pro-migration rationales are too instrumental and transactional to be morally praiseworthy, I think this. Okay, so that's the paper, and thank you very much for coming.